Hello and welcome to Leaders of Tomorrow, India's largest platform for entrepreneurs. I'm Sunanda Jaiseelan. In focus is International MSME Day, and keeping that in mind, all of this week we're bringing you some of the most in-depth conversations with high-profile experts and thinkers to answer your most pertinent questions on this national platform. Let me then, to kick off this week, welcome someone back on the show who's joined us previously, needs no introduction, and is one of India's sharpest minds, Montek Singh Ahluwalia. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us here, sir, on the Leaders of Tomorrow. It's always a pleasure, having you join us. We had you speaking directly to SMEs and MSMEs on Budget Day, where we went live with your comments. And so much has changed in the last year and a half since we had the opportunity to speak with you last. And I'm talking about the pandemic, and I want to refer to a recent interview that you've done speaking about the macroeconomy, where you said the worst is behind us, but we're not really in a very comfortable position as we speak. To kickstart today's conversation, as you're speaking to India's small businesses and India's entrepreneurs, what would you like to tell them about your view, your projection for where you're seeing the economy and India really headed in the mid to short term for the rest of this fiscal?
Well, let me clarify. When I said the worst is behind us, I didn't mean to say that everything is now hunky dory. I mean, the truth is that in the first quarter of the last financial year, we had a measured 24% decline in GDP. What I was saying was that period of sharp decline has actually come to a stop, and the economy is kind of clawing its way back to normalcy. At one stage, a lot of people were saying it was going to be a sharp V-shaped recovery. That doesn't
Yeah.
look like it's going to be the case. I mean, if for no other reason that we've had a second surge beginning in March, April of this year, which really set us back quite a bit. In fact, the finance minister in her budget speech had projected that following a 7.3% decline in GDP in the previous year, that is
Yeah.
2021, she was looking forward to an 11.3% growth in the current year. Now, quite frankly, I don't think the government has officially revised that, but it's quite clear that growth is not going to be 11.3%. It's going to be significantly lower. Now, opinions
Sure.
vary on how much it's going to be, and some people say it could be as low as 7%. In other words, more or less simply getting back to 2019-20 levels. Others think it could be a little higher. But either way,
Sure.
the overall economy is just clawing itself back to where it was in 2019-20. And when I say where it was in 2019-20, this ignores the fact that the recovery is actually, even within that, is K-shaped. It's not that
Sure.
everything has gone back to normal, but some sectors seem to have done reasonably well, as you would expect. I mean, for example, the pharma sectors dependent on e-commerce and digital technologies, they seem to be doing quite well. But
Sure.
most of the sectors, manufacturing, is just trying to get back to where they were in 2019-20. And some sectors are very badly affected. I mean, those are the contact sectors, the service sectors,
Yeah.
gyms, entertainment, hotel, travel, and so on. They're still low. But above all this, I think the small scale sector has taken a especially bad hit. So,
Yeah.
while things are not going to get worse, the problems they face are going to mount. Because up to now, they have benefited from sort of credit relaxation. They haven't
Sure.
had to repay their debt. They've been given a moratorium, etc., etc. Now, that moratorium is only for official bank loans. I mean, most of the really small scale sectors don't rely on commercial bank loans. They rely on private sources of funding, which have probably got squeezed. So I think
Yeah.
it would be wrong to think that they're getting back to normal. They're actually still in deep trouble. And frankly, many people have said we don't actually have data on what's happening in the small scale sector. Traditionally, our national accounts estimation has assumed that whatever growth there is in the formal sector, similar growth is occurring in the informal sector. Now,
Sure.
these estimates are periodically revised based on censuses of unincorporated enterprises. The last one, I think, was done in 2015-16, but it hasn't still been released. So as a result, the national accounts data, many people think, are exaggerated because they don't reflect the fact that the small scale and informal sector was actually hit worse than the formal sector. So that's really the
Sure.
overall position. How do you get out of it? That's a bigger question.
I want to try and sort of break down the headline when it comes to the GDP. You were talking about contact sectors like hospitality, etc. We've seen a contraction of 2.3% versus a growth of nearly 5.7%. This was at the beginning of the year, of course, not accounting for the third wave. Experts are now saying in the next 2 to 4 weeks, states like Maharashtra could see the worst impact of the third wave. For entrepreneurs who are watching this conversation, what is your advice for them when it comes to, they've already seen so much of an impact all through 2020, now through the first half of 21. What are things really going to look like for them? What's your advice for them for this fiscal and for surviving this third wave?
Well, I'm not a businessman, so I can't give advice that a businessman would value. But from an
Sure.
economist point of view, I think I would say that they better be cautious. They better build up whatever reserves they can. And uncertainty is a very real phenomenon. If you look at the Reserve Bank of India, in its latest estimate of GDP growth for the Monetary Policy Committee meeting, which has just happened, I mean,
Yeah.
they showed a wide range around an average of 9.5% growth. I think even that 9.5% is a bit optimistic. But if you take the lower likelihood of possibilities, you may basically the best that you can hope for is that
Hmm.
overall demand conditions might get back to where they were in 2019-20. But
Sure.
a couple of things have to be factored in. In a situation where credit is really squeezed, many of the smaller scale businesses will not be able to get credit. And when they are hit, it's not enough to give them credit. I mean, if you want them to survive, I mean, they're suffering large losses and they don't have reserves to
Sure.
fall back on, capital, family capital, etc. Now, unless these enterprises are given a straight grant, they may just be forced to pack up. That
Yeah.
doesn't mean that production will be lost because the stronger enterprises that are in a better position will be able to expand and get their market share. But I
Yeah.
mean, to some extent, this shakeout, if you like, in the small scale sector was sort of
Yeah.
unavoidable because we've known for a long time that our small scale sector is dominated by a very, very large number of very small enterprises,
Yeah.
hiring between 2 and 5 workers. And quite honestly, while it's very important to have an environment where small enterprises can begin, because I mean, even the biggest enterprises begin with 3 or 4 workers and a student and a bright idea and what have you. But if you have a situation where a very large number of enterprises are small and have stayed small, that is not an indication of a dynamic small scale sector. So I think many of the trends in the economy that were evident even earlier, the push for digitalization, the push for formalization, making tax systems simpler so that smaller enterprises can start complying, all of this was going to push for formalization. And even in the best circumstances, there would have been a shakeout. Now, the problem
Sure.
is, it's one thing to have a shakeout in an overall environment where the economy is booming along at 8% growth. because there's lots of growth happening. Workers who lose jobs in small enterprises get jobs elsewhere. Even owners of small enterprises may be willing to become employees in other enterprises, etc. But when that happens in an environment where the overall growth position is really slumped, it's socially very painful and very disruptive. And I wish, frankly, the only advice I could give to a small businessman is to expect things to remain difficult for at least another year, and meanwhile
Okay.
build up some internal reserves so that you can survive. And as far as the government is concerned, I think they have to focus on the fact that merely giving credit, even if it's on moderately concessional terms, is only kicking the can down the road. Because unless you intend
Sure.
this to be a grant, uh, the enterprise will just end up becoming more indebted. And if it wasn't capable of servicing its earlier debt, it certainly won't be able to service the larger debt that it's taking on.
Let's take a quick break. Back in just a moment. Is that giving you some sense of hope that at least manufacturing is seeing some sort of revival and we could possibly expect that to continue for this fiscal?
I think manufacturing is seeing a revival, but even that, a lot of the uncertainty relates to how efficiently we'll be able to get the
Yeah.
vaccination program.
Welcome back with us here on Leaders of Tomorrow. Today, keeping in mind International MSME Week, we're bringing you 1 week of the most in-depth conversations with India's most well-known experts and sharpest minds. In today's episode, we're continuing our conversation with Montek Singh Ahluwalia. I just want to very briefly talk about manufacturing as well, given that nearly 60 to 70% of all MSMEs in India today are in the manufacturing space. The GDP data showing that there's been a growth of nearly 6.9% versus a contraction of 4.2%. Is that, giving you some sense of hope that at least manufacturing is seeing some sort of revival and we could possibly expect that to continue for this fiscal?
I think manufacturing is seeing a revival, but even that, a lot of the uncertainty relates to how efficiently we'll be able to get the
Yeah,
vaccination program. I mean, quite
yeah,
honestly, everybody says this, even the government is saying it, that the most important thing we can do now, which would make a difference by the end of the year, is if we could say that, look, a very large percentage of our population is now vaccinated. Now, the government has set a very commendable target of universal complete vaccination by end of December. Frankly, even if we don't achieve complete vaccination, I mean, the relevant age group, that would mean 800 million people. But if we've probably done about 230 million, and that's not full vaccination. If this 230 million can become something like 700 million or so by December, even not fully vaccinated, but at least many of them having got one dose, that will be a changed situation. I mean, the expectation that health will become a recurring problem will definitely go down. And many other
yeah.
things we have to do, by the way, on the health front. And those are long term, and I hope that both the central government and the state governments will pay attention to that. But today, it's vaccination. If we do not get our vaccination strategy in order, make sure that there are enough supplies, make sure that the states have what they need and they have the flexibility to actually implement the vaccination program, then I think we are adding a lot of uncertainty. Not just internal uncertainty, but external. Look, at the moment, you're in a position where students can't go abroad to join universities into which they've been admitted because they cannot prove that they've got vaccination. Flights are suspended between whatever the United Kingdom and here. If somebody from India comes into the UK today, they have to undergo 10 days of quarantine. Now, all that this does is it reduces business opportunities. I mean, people avoid going there. And if other
Yeah.
places manage the situation better, we will have a major setback precisely at the time where we should be looking good and ready to go. Now,
Yeah.
one can be optimistic, and I think one should be optimistic, and I hope that the government realizes that nothing will be more important at the end of December uh, than to be able to say, well, we did a pretty good job on vaccination. It doesn't have to be 100%,
Sure.
but pretty good. What is pretty good job? Well, 650 million, 700 million. I think that would be pretty good.
Sure. So, you're saying vaccination, a majority of the population being vaccinated by December, but most experts, and I'm sure you've seen those views as well, are saying that unless a majority of India's adult population is not vaccinated by the festive season by October, November, it's going to have a huge impact on sentiment. I'd love to get your comments on that because India Inc., of course, placing a lot of its bets and growth estimates around the festive season. So if we are going to miss that target, in terms of sentiment, what comments would you want to offer?
Well, no, I agree with it. As I've said, I mean, the target that the government has set, which is for end
Yeah,
December, very ambitious and commendable target. We should recognize that targets are always missed a little bit. So you should give more or less full marks if the target is almost reached. But it's no good just waiting till December. Having
yeah,
got that target, we should have a monthly target. But in order to reach that target, what do we expect? And maybe in the next 2 months, what we expect is more limited, and then more supplies are coming. I would say, for example, that we need to have a public knowledge of what are the total orders that have been placed on all the domestic manufacturers. There is no, now that the central government has accepted that it will be responsible for delivery of say 75% of the vaccines.
sure,
I don't see, I think the thing that would inspire the greatest confidence is a clear negotiation with each domestic supplier, giving them a reasonable price and saying, look, we're willing to place orders for so many 100 million to be delivered on this time schedule. And if the
sure,
domestic suppliers accept that time schedule, we can add that all up and we can say, look, this is what we've planned. I think the domestic suppliers should be given assurance that, look, if there's anything that's holding that up, domestic, logistical problems, even international problems, we're willing to come and help. Now,
sure,
that would enable you to judge whether in September you're on track. I mean, in
sure,
order to reach 800 million in December, or maybe at a lower end, let's just say even 700 million in December, what do you have to be by September? And frankly, if you're not there by September, it's not the end. In fact, it shouldn't be by September. It should be at the end of July, at the end of August, at the end of September, giving clear warning. Are we on
sure.
track or are we not? And if we are not on track, then we should just rework the policies.
All right, completely out of time. Then on this episode of Leaders of Tomorrow, if you have any feedback for us, as always, love hearing from you. Our contact details are on your screens as we speak. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.